Rick Villars. I'm Vice President for Data Center and Cloud Research at IDC, and I'm going to be the moderator for the third quick track panel here in the Cloud Foundation area. The focus on this one is software innovation. So I was part of the service provider session earlier in the day, and we just had a great session on hardware, and I noticed a couple common themes in those. So now we're going to go focus in the software area, and I've got a great panel here. I think our biggest problem is to make sure that we don't fall off the stage because it's so packed full of folks. So I want to welcome them all here. Just want to give each of you a quick chance to introduce yourself. We'll just go straight down the line here. So first we have Andrew Stokes, who's Chief Scientist for Deutsche Bank. So you want to just do a quick intro of you and what you do for Deutsche Bank?
Yeah, sure. Hi guys. Check the mics up. So I was doing the keynote over on the Cloud Storm track earlier. My job is Chief Scientist for Global Technology of Deutsche Bank. I do the long-distance strategy and research for data centers, including all the virtualization and cloud technologies.
Great, and next to him we have Elad Yoran, who is he's the Chairman and CEO for Vaultive.
So good afternoon, everybody. Elad Yoran. I'm a serial entrepreneur. I figured that's why they asked me to join this panel on software innovations. My fourth startup, all in the IT security space. So I'll try and share my perspective on security as it relates to cloud.
Great. Well, thank you, and then looking for a great conversation. Next, I have Gordon Haff, who is Chief Evangelist. I like that title for Red Hat. So, Gordon.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, so I'm a cloud evangelist with Red Hat, and I think from a software innovation point of view, the thing that I find really interesting going on is that fundamentally everything that's going on in cloud, whether we're talking public cloud, private cloud, or hybrid, the kind of innovation that's delivered that wouldn't have been possible without open source software, which obviously we've been very involved with at Red Hat.
Great, thanks. And next, I wanted to ask if I have the order on the sheet here, so I'm going to go with that. Greg Brown, who's the VP and CTO at McAfee.
That would be me. So I'm responsible for helping McAfee understand customer needs with regard to adopting security technology and how we can evolve our mid to long-term roadmap to address needs both today as well as in the future at McAfee.
Great, thanks. And then next I have, so I have John Engates, who's the CTO at Rackspace. I think you guys all got to see him earlier.
Yeah, I spoke next door. Yeah, thank you. So I am CTO at Rackspace. I've been at Rackspace for about 12 years, and I spend a lot of time in rooms like this and on the road, spending time with customers and partners, and kind of playing a role of evangelist as well. So yeah, I've been around the company for a long time, and I think did you ask if we should chat about what we were doing? You want to come back to that? Okay, let's come back to that. All right.
So, and then our last presenter, not least, though, I want to say absolutely up front, it just happened to be in the order here, is Reuven Cohen, who's the Senior Vice President for Virtustream.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm Senior Vice President at Virtustream. I help sort of with strategy around cloud. I'm also quite active, like John, in traveling around and learning about what people want about clouds. I also have the digital provocateur column at Forbes magazine, and a variety of other schemes.
Well, great. Thanks, everybody. And thanks for all of you for coming and joining us. I want to kick it off with just a couple quick comments to set the stage here, and that's because what IDC does. We always have to do this. One of the things, since we're talking about software here, we ought to obviously have the question about, well, what are people doing with the cloud today? So where should we be focusing our software efforts? And this is actually a survey we wrapped up in the February timeframe. It was about 430 IT executives in the US, Canada, so North America mostly, asking about where they're likely to adopt cloud services in their environments in the coming year. Didn't want to sort of go through all these in great detail, but sort of there were three messages. One is clearly people are doing this in social and collaboration. So, and that goes without saying, I think it's what everybody's speaking. The other two messages were that actually a lot of cloud is around data, and I think we've heard a lot of that today as well. Increasingly, it's data management, data storage, data collection, data use. But increasingly also, and this is also is important, is that a lot of cloud initiatives are tied to mobile initiatives. So, where we're doing bring your own device, where we're doing mobile devices and sensors, and bringing those all together. Another way to think about this is we also do try and track spending on cloud solutions by relative size of industries. So one of the things I wanted to share is IDC went out and did this matrix of where the spend is today and who's driving it in terms of using public cloud solutions. And you can see here it's a real interesting concentration of the industries that are dedicating the most to cloud, as well as are, in a sense, the most companies are committed to it are communications media, which isn't really a big surprise, professional services, business services, legal, securities, investment services, and banking. So it's a little surprising when you think about everybody thinks banking's that would never go to public cloud. But I think we can have a little discussion about where that's happening and who in the what is used for in the banking space. I'm going to save this next slide. I don't want to have it right now, but if we decide to have a fight later, we'll do that. It's about platform choices. But what I want to do now is give you guys a chance to participate in the conversation. We have a polling question here. So what I'd love you to do is just go and text the keyword that's appropriate for this. And the question is, in your opinion, over the next year, 2 years, where do you think open source software can contribute the most to what's going on in the world of cloud and cloud service offering, cloud service delivery? And your choices are in data management. So there, just text. I think those on the side here, you can't really see it. It's data, MGMNT. IT operations and management, so the automation space, and that's IT ops, OPS. Analytics, so analytics, BI is the text there. Security, InfoSec. And then the last is networking, so network tech, TEC. So you guys, please go ahead and enter those texts. We've got some time here, so you don't have to rush. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. What I want to do now is jump into the questions here. And I did want to start with asking you, and just go pretty much straight down the line of, so we're here talking about open source software and innovation. I'd love for you, give me an example of whether you or one of your customers is doing something innovative these days with open source software solution.
Yeah, I'd say a lot of what's happening in virtualization is being driven by the open source community. In particular, in the area that I'm interested in is some of the virtual switch technology, some of the capabilities around Open vSwitch is really interesting, and the ability to potentially insert your own controls and capability into that infrastructure, leveraging the open nature of that development community, as well as the stuff that's happening around provision with OpenStack and some of the other platforms out there.
Reuven?
Well, it's interesting. We were chatting about this in Hall briefly. The idea of software is permeates everything. Hardware essentially is software these days. It's just different flavors of it, right? It's a delivery mechanism. In terms of what I see interestingly is big data is everywhere, and the idea of analyzing information in the nearest and fastest way possible creates a competitive advantage for a lot of organizations and companies today. And I was actually did a post recently where I was talking to a large organization. They said that what big data does for us is it changes what used to take months into days or hours, and that's tremendously a game changer for a lot of organizations.
John?
Yeah, so open source, as I pitched in my presentation the other day, or the other at lunchtime, the open source has been a part of what we've done at Rackspace for many years, and so I think that the most exciting thing we've gotten involved in and kicked off was OpenStack. I think I'll take a little tiny bit of credit for that, but Rackspace has been a big proponent of open source software all along. We think the cloud ought to be open, and that's where we're going.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo that open source is essentially pervasive, so it's hard to name an area of software where it hasn't played a role. I guess if I had to pick out one area that hasn't been talked about yet, and cloud is in many respects management. And so as we look at open source cloud, whether we're talking infrastructure as a service or platform as a service, this seems to be the area where open source is finally coming into management, which is an area that's kind of been slow to get to date.
I would agree with the past two comments in the role of open source as sort of being a critical one in the development of cloud, and it really depends on where within the hierarchy you're referring to in terms of infrastructure and platform, where you may not see it as much as at the application level and at the data level. So platform infrastructure, and certainly on the management side, I think it has a very important role.
Well, and Andrew, I'll give you the last shot here, is sort of the representative end user on the panel.
I mean, I'd certainly agree that the big data and open source is probably the most dynamic area at the moment. Cloudera and Hortonworks in particular leading the charge in those areas, but also distributions, not just on Intel architectures, but on ARM architectures becomes quite interesting as well. So low cost, low power, massive scale out in those spaces. Two other areas really, scale out file systems, like cluster type file systems. That's a very interesting space as we start to think about not just big data in the classical sense, but big data from a file sense as well, and how we manage that whole space. And then the final thing I throw in, management APIs for cloud, and how we start taking the concept of, say, Apache Delta Cloud as a way to lift up above a particular vendor spec and actually put a layer over the top of these APIs. I'm interested in that right now.
Yeah, I think you guys have touched on a lot of great things. I had one interesting person from our company point out is like, in a lot of ways, big data or the analytics area is one where some would argue that that's where open source was first. In a lot of other open source cases, you were trying to do something less expensively more open that they'd done proprietary before. Whereas in at least some parts of the big data world, open source was there first, and now it's more, can that be sustained or maintained, or are proprietary solutions going to react to that? Any of you guys have any sort of feels on how that's playing out these days? Or any things that we should be paying attention to see how that's going to fall?
I'd point out that analytics is an interesting animal because a lot of cloud, the source code becomes less important, right? It's kind of hidden from view. But in analytics, you still need the code, right? You still need to do something with all that data. You need to transform it into usable, actionable information, and that's especially true when it comes to the code that makes it happen.
Well, I think one of the interesting questions when we start talking about big data is it's sort of given that the analytics engines are open source, but the question is the data itself. What do you have access to? What are the APIs? How open are they? Who owns the data? Who owns the interrelationships between the data? And that's going to be very important around innovation and use of big data technologies in general.
One other thing I didn't hear you guys mention, though, it's sort of tied to analytics, is database. So, open source database or NoSQL or Mongo. So, where do you think that fits in the grand scheme of things right now? That at the core of many businesses from that open source perspective tied to cloud.
I think it's immensely important that platform, one of those, whether it's a Mongo or Cassandra or one of the others, I think they need to be open source, because if you think about that, I mean, that's locking your data into a system where it's being stored, it's being indexed, it's being created or whatever, and getting that data out and making that data portable, I think, is going to be critical for the adoption, just like it is for cloud computing. I mean, I think one of the things that's holding people back is this idea of being locked into a particular technology or vendor. Same goes for big data databases, if you will, or NoSQL databases. If you get stuck in one, it's hard to especially if it's a vendor offering it as a service, it becomes very difficult to move.
Anybody else want to chat about that or comment?
Well, you're certainly a move towards lock-in of data. Like that's one of the primary concerns. I think a lot of people are. You use a social network, just for example. The information resides there. It's never, Facebook, for example, you can't take it anywhere. That's just a consumer example, but there's many other enterprise examples of that.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of been talking open source here. I think it's important to emphasize there's a lot of dimensions around openness as we talk about clouds, APIs, data, application portability. I think it's actually open source is great, but I think it's very important that you don't just sort of think open source, check that off, we're done.
Yeah, that's a great transition, Greg, and I wanted to bring back, because you brought up the sort of the virtual switch. So I would say in the last 34 months, the hottest thing I've been hearing now is SDN and OpenFlow. So maybe you could just tell folks what that is, and then we can maybe chat a little bit more about how we see that playing.
Yeah, so I see it as the next revolution in networking, where in the mid-90s, when IP connectivity was opened up by, let's admit it, Cisco, we were locked into a framework, a fixed framework that was offered up by what was called Internet Operating System, iOS. And what SDN and the Open Networking Foundation or the Open Flow standards are creating is the ability to leverage that switching infrastructure through software definitions. So allowing us to control the behavior of hardware that we know and trust for its connectivity capabilities, and even leverage its routing and infrastructure management capabilities, but allow our software to have an increasing impact on how traffic is moved to and fro the network, which is incredibly powerful in giving the data center the flexibility, the agility, the ability to put the infrastructure to work. And I'll quote a statistic that I saw from Facebook the other day. They said the average switch inside any organization gets utilized anywhere between 20 and 30%. And as a network designer, you said, hey, that's great. What Facebook has been able to achieve through software-defined networking technologies is to drive their switching infrastructure to 100% utilization, which is incredible from a CapEx return perspective.
So Elad, I wanted to do one question for you, and then we'll go on to the poll question. So a lot of the themes today have been around data. Data storage, data collection, data use, all the things that go in that. That raises the issue about maybe the discussion around security is going to be evolving as well. Clearly we still have to worry about intrusion and some of the identity stuff, but more and more challenges are around, no matter where the data is, I need to make sure that it's secure and protected, because it can be moving between internal, private. So what are your thoughts about what we can do from the software side to make that more realistic?
Sure, so I think this is sort of the one place where open source sort of ends and the proprietary nature begins, and it's really an organization's data. If you think about the logical extreme of cloud, is that at some point in time, all of us will be using more or less the same IT infrastructure, the same applications running in the same cloud. And the only differentiator between one organization and the next will be its data, or its people and its data, or the two differentiators. And so I think you asked the question, who owns the data and what can be done with it? We take a very strict view of that question and believe that the data belongs to the business that generates the data. It's their data. It doesn't belong to the cloud provider, whether it's an infrastructure platform or software as a service provider, and that it's incumbent upon the businesses to retain control of their data no matter where it goes in the cloud, and that there are technologies to do that. We are one company that develops an encryption technology that lets businesses encrypt their data before it goes into the cloud while still preserving the functionality of the server-side processing. There are others, but these kinds of technologies, I think, are going to be critical to enabling the growth of cloud and enabling organizations to move their data into the cloud while still maintaining control, because ultimately they're responsible for the compliance, the security. They're the ones that have to deal with data disclosure, residency requirements, and so forth.
So why don't we go ahead and look at the poll question here, if you want to put the results up, and we can have a little reaction to what folks here hear. All right, so for those of you on this side, it's a little hard to see, but so the place where people think open source is going to have the biggest impact is actually information security, about 40%.
Wow.
So that's where they think it can have the biggest impact. I think we're going to have a little chat about that. IT ops was number 2 at about 28%. Data management, about 15%, and network technology, about the same 15%. So nobody thinks open source is tied at all to analytics and BIs.
We've done that.
Wow.
In the next 2 years.
I think you got the wrong panel up here.
Interesting sample here. So, any reactions? John, I'll give you the first.
Well, I would have guessed that you would got quite a bit on analytics BI, because that it is, Hadoop and the work that's going on there, the sort of the essence of big data. It's being driven in open source. You've got lots of projects in the NoSQL that are helping us store that data. Those are all open source. I would have guessed you'd had a lot more there. And security seems to be the one where everybody, maybe the reason I answered security so much is because everybody feels like cloud has so much work to do on security. Maybe that's the reasoning behind that. So,
how many security professionals in the room?
2.
Wow, you guys weighted the audience.
So you're a security side. Should you be nervous here?
I'm not nervous, just simply because a lot of what we do is enabled by an understanding of the threatscape, and that's what McAfee does best. And increasingly, we're dealing with the trustscape as much as we are the threatscape. So what are the good applications, including what are good open source applications, and helping our customers to know that those are the things that are truly running on their servers, not necessarily malware. Sometimes it's easier to say what's good versus what's bad. So that's where a lot of our technology comes into its own, is being able to say yes or no to good or bad stuff.
So Andrew, as the customer, how would you have voted on this?
I'd have voted for networks.
Networks.
To me, networks, software-defined networks still is a completely untapped frontier, particularly in the corporate space. These other areas, of course, they're all important, and they're areas where open source has played an impact already. I think, for me, we're right at the start of the journey on the SDN for corporate.
Yeah, totally. The issue here is the question. I think that the source part of open source is, it's important, the source code, but it's about access, about open access to the information, the networks, the environments that the cloud enables. So it's APIs, it's a whole slew of things. It's not the source that's as important anymore. Anyway.
It's interesting. There was a technical coordination committee meeting of the ODCA yesterday, and one of the topics was open, and we were just debating one word for an hour about what does that mean.
That's never happened before in history.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is we came away from that with an understanding that what we're trying to do with an Open Data Center Alliance isn't specifically open source. It's open interoperability and an open opportunity across this space for everybody.
Yeah, that's a great way to.
Gordon, I'll give you the last shot, and then we want to open up to the audience here.
I know, it seems pretty, it really almost seems backwards to me what's here, because, analytics, BI, are big, incredible opportunities in networking, as you said, cloud management's happening. At some level, security is really baked into things. I don't see anything that specific to open source that's really revolutionizing what we're doing in security, aside from some individual projects like SE Linux and so forth.
So why don't and I'm not going to ask you, but if any of you who voted for security, Infotech and security, give you the first question, sort of to tell us what you were thinking, and then you get to open the mic here. So anybody want to step up to the challenge? So we aren't going to put you on the spot. I just want to understand what people were thinking when they did that response. Shoot.
Well, in a way, this has shed some light on it, and I jotted down my question. Do you see the older, mature ISVs as roadblocks to greater adoption to cloud computing? So, like, I point to the keynote at lunch where, if I jotted down the number correctly, 85% of computing is still done in the private data center. And while large enterprises looking into cloud maybe primarily only for new types of business apps. And I wonder if, the concept of being concerned about security and protection of data really is the overlying reason why large enterprises might not be migrating into the cloud as fast as.
And so just to repeat, and it's because I know we want to record this, and it's a couple things. So one is the question is, and I'll be interested in you guys' responses, how much are the sort of traditional enterprise ISVs, I'd say, let's be diplomatic, either a help or a hindrance to the move to the cloud? And is that somewhat reflected in what enterprises' priorities have been and where they've tended to use cloud or adopt cloud? And then tying that back into, in some ways, is security also part of maybe that same friction? Because we'll make the joke in IDC, we've been doing research on IT for 48 years. The first time security was at the top of the response for the biggest problem was the day they added the second terminal to the first mainframe. So why don't we go ahead, if you guys want to take a quick shot at the enterprise issue and security.
So it's interesting that you think that the cloud would be a place where sort of the emerging applications would reside. What we're seeing in the market is the exact opposite. Is that it's the legacy, and I'd actually argue the more commoditized applications that are migrating to the cloud much more rapidly than the newer stuff. If you look at the chart that you started off with, I mean, the #1 application at the top of the chart was email, if I remember correctly.
Yep, that's what the IT people said, yes.
Right. And so if you think about email, and email, and not talk about ISVs. I mean, that's the Microsoft-owned world, an exchange. Microsoft, in essence, bet the farm on the cloud with their Office 365 initiative, and they don't sell, Exchange without promoting Office 365. Maybe it's Gmail and the Google apps. They saw the writing on the wall, so to speak, but this is really a tremendous shift for the folks at Microsoft. And so I would argue in that particular case, it's not a new application. It's actually the core legacy application, email, and perhaps the largest ISV in the context of Microsoft that are pushing really hard in that direction. As it relates to security, what we're seeing is, despite the fact that it's a commodity application, email, there is still a reluctance to put it up in the cloud because of concerns over data, privacy, security, disclosure, and compliance.
So anybody else, is it all Oracle's fault?
Oh, yeah. I mean, in a way, I think the question's a little bit backwards, to be honest, because organizations are moving to the cloud in whatever form at their own pace, and that's kind of happening with or without Oracle, with or without CA, with and without other large vendors. So it's more that they're not a threat to the cloud is a threat to them.
It's totally true. Here's the thing. Software that's getting created today is being created on the cloud. So if you're an enterprise and you're not embracing the cloud, you're being left out of the mix. You can't get the coolest, latest software because it's not being delivered in the traditional means. It's not being delivered on a CD-ROM. If you don't want to use it, then your competitors will, and you'll lose.
Yeah, I mean, we do get an industry balance act, and I showed up the slide on the industry communities. It's not surprising that media entertainment was top of the list. I mean, some of it's the luck of timing. It's like, here you have a whole industry that is converting to a digital foundation at exactly the same moment that we're suddenly seeing, an infrastructure that is optimized for digital delivery of information, which is what the cloud's about. So that's a quick one, and there's a very vertically driven perspective to this. I'd be interested in Andrew, so since financial services came to the top of the list, and I don't know what you all are doing specifically in the cloud, but why do you think that, that financial services, both sides, trading and banking, do you have a lot of interest in cloud?
I think investment banks and retail banks are tremendous aggregators of data and tremendous processors of data. And so it's a natural thing for us to want to optimize the total cost of ownership around that environment. We've been also typically on the leading edge of a number of waves of technology over the decades in this space, whether it's commercial adoption of Linux into high-frequency trading and into grid and calculation farms, or whether it's adoption of big data and analytics concepts as well. To the specific case of cloud and enterprise, I think there's two things to me that are critical for people to understand here. The first is we're regulated, and until regulators the world over get comfort with cloud in general, we're in a tough situation for putting the majority of what we're doing into an external cloud space. So just the reality of where we are today. That's one. The second thing is the financial reality of the fact that typically we're running tens of megawatts worth of data centers globally, and we're running those things on legacy infrastructures at very low utilization rates in general compared to cloud adoption rates. And that gives us a tremendous opportunity for private cloud to absorb capacity inside those data centers. So when you go around a table of enterprise customers and say, where's the heat right now? Private cloud, public cloud, hybrid, community, anything else? All the heat is on private. And that's because we're just representing a different end of the marketplace at the moment. And what you see through groups like the ODCA is an opportunity to start having this dialogue of how does cloud and the cloud thinking from the public world imply onto medium and large-sized enterprise customers, and where can we get to this happy mix in between? I'm passionately a believer of a hybrid cloud end-state model being the right model, but obviously we're limited by regulations and laws and other things in that space.
Cool. So any more questions out there? I want to get back to the audience. Sorry for side railing here. Somebody want to ask the latest and greatest question? Or So if not, I did say I promised a slide if nobody was going to talk about it. If we could go back to the slides for a second. That's it. That's not it. Oh, there it is. Slide number 5. So if that's possible. So this is a survey that we just did. It's the same kind of deal here. Through. So we did, and this is an interview with developers, because I think we've talked about software, and we haven't talked about probably the #1 customer base for software, which is the developer community. And so we did a survey of, all right, where are you planning to develop on the endpoint? And we can see here pretty widespread. You know, we're not writing it off yet, but there's the high end, the top 2, and then there's everybody else fighting battle to make it to the top 2. And Windows, really making its next push. But then we asked about the data center side. And what are you planning, if you're a developer, which of these are you going to do? And then I apologize, we don't have everybody on the list, but this is a pretty good list of Google, Microsoft, IBM, VMware, Red Hat, Intuit, NetSuite. What we found fascinating is that there's not a lot of variation here, that there are lots of platforms that people are thinking, that the developers are voting with. So I'd ask this is, what do we need to do to get the developer community to really get a little bit more stable here? Because I think from a vendor or an enterprise standpoint, the fact that I have to pick between 9 different choices is a little troubling.
Well, I think there's probably 2 big things that have been somewhat of an issue here. The first is some of the platforms, if you develop for those platforms, you're stuck in those platforms. So having portability across PaaSes. The second is having multiple operational models. Because again, sometimes they want hosted, sometimes you need more of an IT ops model.
Anybody else got a feeling?
Is this for mobile applications?
Well, one side's mobile. The other side is no. This is for developing, and what are you going to develop your new apps, cloud?
It certainly is telling that these are all mobile platforms. And I think that.
On the.
Well, I guess what is interesting is the personal computer is truly a mobile device these days, right? And the applications that are being developed, for the most part, are really starting to focus on that sort of portability.
Mobile first.
Yeah, mobile seems to be the priority for developers.
But the back end, but mobile apps still need a back end.
Of course they do. Of course they do.
So so I guess I'd ask is what's the open standard strategy for the developer side of things? Anybody want to?
Well, if you follow the mobile space, HTML5 is making huge headway right now.
Okay. So we say some standardization there.
Although there's a dichotomy in the mobile space as well. You have the battle of the most closed versus the most open.
Absolutely.
Right? And it's interesting to see that. For the most part, the one that is winning is the one that makes the most money, and that happens to be the most closed.
Interesting. So I have one last chance here for questions for you guys. I want to go. Shoot.
I had a question. Is it Andrew?
Yeah.
So the comment you made around more investment focus right now around private clouds, and I assume that's around virtualization and getting better utilization of servers and automation of infrastructure. I mean, at what point does that start to become mature? Where do you get, I think it's Gartner, I don't know where IDC is, but they say somewhere, in VMware I think is endorsed, is somewhere between 50 and 60% of x86 workloads are virtualized today.
We're up around 70.
What's that?
70.
You're at 70?
Yeah.
So you're kind of getting to where maybe that's going to plateau. Where are you in that stage? And when that does plateau, does that shift more focus to public clouds?
So, first off, I think that there are different deployment models. Some of those things require more virtual solutions, some require more physical solutions. Algorithmic trading, low latency, for example, is less amenable to a cloud type infrastructure, obviously by its nature. Sometimes where we've had large-scale Java hosting and web hosting farms in the past, we've been able to create dozens of applications loaded onto single servers where the virtualization layer historically hasn't given us any kick in terms of utilization. It's now coming in on a second wave as the layer that gives us the abstraction that allows us to move workloads around, and that becomes a valuable layer for the infrastructure. I think private private cloud is more than just virtualization and automation at the moment. I think that was really 1.0 thinking in terms of where corporates were, in terms of, gee, I've got VMware, I must be a cloud now, automatically. And I think we went through the whole life cycle of that as well, of internal cloud washing, thinking about what the cloud really means and what the values are of these things, and then bringing those attributes through and start emphasizing those. And in the other presentation, I was talking about the cloud journey that we've been on. And actually linking from your topic back to the target platforms for the developers, I think these things are linked, because right in the middle of this, it's not about the target and it's not about the virtualization. It's about the architecture and the types of applications we want to create in the first place. And I think what's still needed for the industry is more focus on how to create applications in a different way that understand how to work in this more flexible, elastic, multiple target state, multiple mobile device end state type environments. I don't think that we're good at that right now. So rather than saying, should we be using an app foundry or a cloud foundry or different platforms for this, the app engines and things, the first discussion is, what do cloud applications look like, and how do we train the next generation of developers to start developing to those platforms? So I'm interested to see what my colleagues think about that.
So I'll let you guys one last comment, and then we got to shut down. So any of you want to react to that or respond?
Totally agree.
Yeah. Cool.
Well, I'd also point out that within a lot of enterprises, PaaS has become the new middleware. And it's just.
I have people who call that. It's like, that's middleware.
Yeah, it's just a more automated form of it. So
I think we're still going through a paradigm shift in the IT industry with regard to cloud. For example, if you think back 10 years, we all had software deployment strategies. You roll into the office and your machine would spend 10 minutes updating Office. How many of you have a strategy at which you tell your organization, here's how you embrace XYZ SaaS application? How do you control that? How do you enforce a policy? How do you make sure your password security policy applies when they do so, for example? How many of you have a strategy where, as an IT organization, you have a normalized approach to saying, I'm going to create this virtualized server, and here's how I've set a policy on whether that virtualized server can land in a public platform or only in our private platform? And until you do that, we're not going to see that broad-scale adoption that we took, to be honest, 15 years building IT infrastructure that says we can automatically update and patch Microsoft applications, to pick on one.
Well, great, and I want to finish. Thank you guys all for your time. So thanks to the panelists, Andrew, Elad, Gordon, Greg, John, sorry, and Reuven. I'm terrible at names. That's my person.
Did all right.
But I want to thank you guys all for your time. I want to appreciate your participation. I want to remind you guys that this is about more than just us here talking to you. It's about sharing and leveraging a lot of the tools that the OBCA has put out now, so we can start the communication today, tomorrow, going forward. Thank you all again for participating in the panel, and also I want to remind you guys, don't forget the best place that we're going to share data is at the cocktail party. So please join us for that as well. Thank you.